Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful, real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter to succeed. CyberSync continuous control automation ingests data from the IT GRC stack to update controls against regulatory requirements and risks in real time, delivering insights and visibility. See how members of the Fortune 500 are saving millions annually by visiting securityweekly.com/cybersync. Endpoint security is designed to protect every device in your fleet, wherever it may be. These days, that can be a lot of different places. Find out how HP Wolf Security uses emerging strategies like application isolation, along with a zero-trust approach and framework to give you a powerful, manageable, usable solution to your growing and increasingly spread-out security challenges. Learn how HP Wolf Security can make a difference across your endpoints at securityweekly.com/HPWolf.
How have business drivers impacted your organizational risk? Simulate Extended Security Posture Management enables CISOs to know what parts of your cybersecurity portfolio to keep, what to get rid of, and what to buy. Know that your cybersecurity investments are optimized and can reduce cybersecurity risk. With Simulate, you don't assume you are secure, you know. Visit securityweekly.com/simulate to learn more. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review those forms often and will reach out to you once reviewed. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, gentlemen, this week's articles. This first article, I remember the original CISO MindMap, right?
Yeah.
And this is an updated version of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to cover this because it's crazy when you think about all the things that are on that mind map that now roll up to the CISO role. It's kind of overwhelming.
It is. And I mean, just the OG version of that mind map. You know, I remember back in the day using that to sit in front of executives, including board members and the CEO, to say, I need you to realize the magnitude of what a security team and a GRC team has to deal with on the daily. And then you put that in front of them, and it's almost like that holy shit moment that they have. They didn't realize the responsibility and the pressures on the CISO that were actually there, but they were so far under the covers that they never even thought about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Ben, I'm sure you use that map.
Well, you think about that map, and you think about the number of things that are on it, and you try to figure out, like, how do you prioritize, right? I mean, it's talk to any CISO, how many of those things can they actually address, right? And how deep are you going? I think the perspective is also useful to think about when you're talking to the teams that are working for you. Really understand that they have a much greater level of responsibility to handle those low-level things, to bubble that up to the CISO so he can ultimately handle the strategic value task. So if you're handling things at that sub-level, you're just not operating with efficiency. I mean, you've got to handle the strategic and let your teams handle the tactical.
Yeah, and I love some of the updates that are in here, especially leaning toward a whole section just called dedicated to business enablement, right? I love that that's in there now. You have a business enablement section. I love that they threw in human resources as well as legal, right? Because before there were legal pressures, but now the human resources side of the aisle, having a section in there that's focused on selling InfoSec to the internal teams, and then they had to throw in there work from home, permanent work from home.
Yeah. They came out with 6 recommendations, and they admit some are the same as last year, but we've covered lots of these on this show, right? The first one, I mean, everybody's dealing with ransomware defenses, detection, response, and that one, I believe, was on the list last year because it's just with ransomware. But, number 2, reduce, consolidate security tools, technologies, and vendors. Jason, we've talked about this a ton on this, right? Is you cannot run...
My soapbox is worn out from that, Matt.
Yeah. You cannot have 50, 60, 70 vendors and manage them all across the team. Consolidation is required in some form or fashion here to manage this. And then they get into the people elements, right? The staff training. and in building out team skills, because again, the skills gap and all the other things we talk about.
Yeah. And I'd like to make one adjustment, and that adjustment is to number 6. Maintain a risk management platform, because the register, we don't want it in an Excel spreadsheet based on the last conversation we just had.
Which is exactly right. I thought that was really interesting tie into the previous segment, right? Is, okay, if I'm just maintaining a risk register, I can just do this in an Excel spreadsheet, but that's not going to help you scale and automate based on the conversation we just had.
100%. So that's just my minor tweak to number 6 that I'd love to see. So if you're listening, please make that change.
Please make that change. They classify themselves as the world's largest cybersecurity benchmarking study. Okay, I've done some research studies almost as big. Oh, we missed it by 100, I guess, to tie them. This was like 1,200. I think this was 1,200 responses in 14 countries. We've done 1,100 in 11 countries, so pretty close. Anyways, they come out with this
2023 goals, Matt. 2023 goals.
Yeah, my new MBO is, how can I do a bigger survey than this team?
I saw this article, Matt, and I was wondering if it was going to make the list or not for this week. So I'm glad to see it here.
Yeah.
No, I did, right? I was looking through this and I go, there's some interesting recommendations based off the research data, right? Because what they did is they went out and they researched and grabbed all this data, and then they come back. And in the power of surveys for people who have never done them is, how do you construct a survey so that you can analyze it and extract these key findings and really create value out of the research? My vice president of research does a fabulous job with this. The way she can analyze data and compare and contrast different segments of the market are huge when you do research like this. And they've extracted some recommendations around, from the results. Here's things you got to pay attention to. And again, I didn't see any surprises on this list.
No, I mean, number one, the results were eye-opening, right? I mean, in the beginning, they talk about, we have the highest budgets ever, right? Highest investment ever. We have the most conversation at a C-suite and board level ever. But yet, I mean, it's obviously been a national imperative all over the news, from the president to, Secretary Mayorkas from Homeland Security, calling this a shall, with cybersecurity in the business. But you still have, almost, I think it was 29% of CEOs and 40% of CISOs saying that their organizations are still ill-prepared. Yeah. I mean, that was a little eye-opening,
Was it really eye-opening,
very eye-opening,
or did you kind of expect that? I mean, that's.
You know what? I think seeing it in an actual study made me kind of say, "Holy shit! The fears are correct." I don't know. It just validated things we talk about and we worry about. But 40% of CISOs that were surveyed here, god damn.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think about that, right? We've covered aspects of the story before. And when you think about it, Jason, you're like, yeah, those numbers sound about right. But as a CISO sitting in the chair, and you know that your organization's not prepared, doesn't that just scare the hell out of you?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, one of the things I love is number one, where it says take cybersecurity maturity to the highest level. And leveraging the NIST framework outperformed all of the other, all of the other organizations. That it makes me feel really good that NIST has been in my vocabulary for a very, very long time, and using it as a model and a framework, that it makes me feel good. So it shows that leveraging some type of base framework to work off of is going to make you more successful.
But there's a stat in there, 119 days to detect a breach. We're down from 200 days, but we're still at almost 4 months required to detect a breach in organizations, even at the highest maturity levels, Jason. Like we've carved 2 months in the past 5+ years off of that mean time to detect.
I know it's scary, and it's I don't know. What do you equate that to? It's how fast we're transforming our businesses. It's the lack of, I mean, I just look at the last 2 years, and business owners had a lot more on their plate than having to worry about cybersecurity. They need to keep their doors open in so many instances, right? It was, we adapt, we implement technology as fast as we possibly can, or we may have to shutter the doors because we're not driving any revenue in the pandemic.
Yeah, but I think the answer is my story number 5, just to answer your question. We'll get there in a couple stories, but I think there's a missing ingredient, and I think it's story number 5. But
well, I'm interested to talk about story number 5 when we get there. But I think if you look at the numbers and you look at the statistics, and you mentioned we haven't shaved much time off, while the investment has gone up, right, 51% increase year over year, it's still historically underinvested, right? Like that's really where it is, right? I mean, there's some other key things in here, approaching the problem as a human problem, thinking about automation and AI to deal with it at the speed that we're seeing it. But if you think about the speed and the rapidness of change in the environment and the threats that we're dealing with, in no other area of the business, I would challenge anyone to say that, HR or finance or, even product development is evolving at the pace where the threats to the enterprise are evolving. And so as a result, I don't think the investments being made at the level commensurate with the risk. And that at the end of the day, you're always going to be behind the 8 ball. You're always going to be trying to figure out how to address the mind map if you don't have the investment, right? And so that for me is just core. 0.81% of revenue. I don't know. That seems like the wrong number to me.
Agreed.
That's true. Yeah. What did we used to say? If we were 3 to 5% of IT spend, it would be a better day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're under 1% of overall revenue. Yeah. Where a GDPR fine is way more
4%.
than that. Because it's 4% of annual revenue. So just think about that for a second. You're spending on average 0.81% of revenue, and the potential fines for even just GDPR is 4%. That's a 5x swing.
It really is.
Those are big numbers.
Yeah. And one could say, well, that's 4 years of investment is it one fine of GDPR, how often you get fined, but ultimately that's not the only exposure rate, right? I mean, you've got the PR, the potential issues with data that's lost or intellectual property. I mean, there's a ton of information that actually results in hard costs to the organization. That isn't just the fines, but they're certainly out there. They're getting bigger and they're getting more real for many organizations. So I think, again, people are going to have to relook at how those budgets are allocated.
Yeah, absolutely. This next article, Equifax's new CISO, Jamil Afarshi, talks about being transparent and how security shouldn't be a trade secret. But then by being transparent, it can make you more secure, but it also creates some challenges for an organization. And, both of you guys having been in the chair, like how on par or in line is Jamil with this whole open transparency, but also you got to be careful because it actually can slow you down in a couple cases.
Yeah, I think it's perspective. So in transparency, I actually used to work with Jamil at Visa when we were both there at the same time, and we've known each other for a while now. I agree with him in the sense that I think we do have to be transparent about the trust factor in sharing data with our customers, and I think our vendors should do it with us, right? When I was at Qualys, Jamil and I had talked about openly sharing, vulnerability management scores and how we would do that and kind of an exchange methodology that, you could opt in. And if you opted in, you got other information, right? And I think being more transparent allows you to execute quicker, but there's always that risk of, you're opening the kimono and you're allowing people to see where your deficiencies are. But I think at the end of the day, that for me emboldens trust. If you're doing that and you say, hey, this is the things we're really doing, and here are the issues we have problems with, and we'd like some help from the rest of the community, I think that there's a lot of traction that can be had from that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some power on the level of vulnerability, right? And I always say that the folks who come before you who say they're perfect are lying through their teeth, right? 100%. Nobody's perfect. And that level of transparency, and we're going to get into the next article, but it ties the two together really well. Know your audience, right? I mean, know the audience you're having the conversation with. And there's been many instances where I've sat in front of a customer and I've said, we are not as mature as we need to be in this particular aspect, control, technology. But here's our roadmap. Here's how we're going to remediate. Here's what it's going to look like to get us there. And here are all the dependencies we have to get there. And it's gone a long way, right? It's gone a long way to have that level of transparency and the hard conversation. And I've had plenty of risk officers and CISOs come back and say, you know what, we're in the same boat. Maybe we can help each other out. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, just having that open communication and really, it is a level of vulnerability because no organization is perfect.
Well, I think one of the things that you can, that Jamil is doing, and I think, CISOs who are really smart about this can do, is you can be the biggest advocate for your sales team, right? If you actually get out and you have those customer conversations. And so I can think back to conversations I've had with customers and said, hey, look, in transparency, these are the problems we have, right? And here's how we're addressing them. Here's how we're trying to do some self-compensating controls. And I've never had one of those conversations where the customers come back and said, you know what, I just can't do this with you because, you're not perfect. What they say is, hey, we have the same problems. I appreciate the honesty. And I feel like we can have a relationship where if we have issues, we can work them out. And that's a game changer, right? And so I think it's the approach. It's the whole industry is we need to come together and understand no one's perfect. And it's about how we all work together to improve posture.
Yep, 100% agree.
Well, and think about where he came from, Ben, right? I mean, he came in after the breach,
the
right?
breach,
I mean, he had to rebuild trust and reputation with customers and everybody, right? So he took a very transparent approach to doing this, which I applaud him for, because I'm a full believer in full transparency, right? Because I think that builds trust with your team, it builds trust with your customers, and he had to do that because he had to rebuild the whole reputation of Equifax along the way.
Yeah, and we've seen over the last, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years, we've seen some companies that haven't been as forthcoming with data and information in the result of a breach, and it hasn't played well. And we've seen other companies that have come out and tried to be as transparent as possible. It was handled really well. I mean, people respected that and they were able to move forward and say, hey, like, give everybody some grace. Like, this is hard for everybody, but we'll move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. CISO Shares Top Strategies to communicate security's value to the business. Jason already hit on number 1, know your audience.
Big one. Yeah. It's a big one.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because when I think about the 2 and 3, it says, don't start with metrics, but then be quantitative. Like, isn't that like a kind of a conflict a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, be quantitative. Just don't lead the conversation with it, I guess. Still lead off with it, right? And then you make sure it's there. It's part of the agenda, but just don't lead it. I'm gonna be 100% honest. All of those mean nothing if you're not delivering the message to the audience the right way. That is the biggest one for me, because the way you're speaking to your board, the way you're speaking to your staff, the way you're speaking to your customers, the way you're speaking to your partners, and you're delivering that message needs to be refined, needs to be targeted, needs to be well thought out, right? So you can get the best impact and the best results.
Yep. Ben, any more comments on that?
No, agree with that.
All right, now to article number 5.
There you go.
So I like this article. I enjoyed this article a lot. This came from a VC. She works for a venture capital firm. And it's an interesting take on the market, because when you think about creating innovation, everything we've done is kind of vertical innovation, right? Somebody's going to come out with the new shiny widget that they're going to try to get into the market to solve a specific problem. She says, but that's our problem in general. We have too many vertical innovation pieces, and what we're missing is that horizontal innovation of integrating all this stuff together. And it ties back into the earlier article where we were talking about streamlining vendors, right? And the ability to, reduce the number of technologies and vendors that you're using. That requires innovation horizontally, not vertically. And I thought this was a really good way for people to start thinking about, well, yeah, I got to tie this data together and then bring my SOAR platform to automate off of this. It's not about creating the next shiny widget.
No, it's the whole reason why, you call me the ecosystem fanboy, right? And really building out that cross-platform ecosystem, or start to consolidate on vendor platforms that can integrate with the rest of the stack. That's the whole reason behind it, is I wanted that ability to have the horizontal view and capability to pull information down from across the entirety of the stack.
Yeah, I think when you try to drill down and get very look at it as a very micro problem, and you forget the macro level, a holistic horizontal viewpoint, you're leaving a lot of information on the table that you can't utilize and translate. And so, Jason, I think you've had kind of a similar journey in that you've had responsibility for IT, like taking over CIO responsibilities as well. It's kind of eye opening, right? And you start to think about core systems and how you utilize them, and creating platforms versus creating islands in isolation. And so I think that platform play and figuring out how to stitch things together really becomes a value proposition to the CISO. And then you start to have to spend less time managing and more times actually, solving problems and issues. So that's where I concur with this article. I think it's really about trying to figure out how do you gain value across, as opposed to diving deep down into the weeds. You can solve far more things at that level, right?
Yeah, and the added benefit is once you come up with that standard, now it's a better conversation with other business units around integrating new systems into the ecosystem. Because the first question is, does it integrate into our current ecosystem?
It's the strategy play, right? It's like, what's our core strategy? If you know the core strategy, you can drive the ship. You've got the rudder and the keel laid down. Then all of a sudden, everything just plugs into it. You can execute much faster. So
that's it.
And if you tie this back to our first segment, right? We were talking about this, Jason, right? You said it. Like, how do I scale risk? Well, if you don't have an integrated platform play to bring in the data you need on a real-time basis, you're never going to scale your risk management program. Now, this applies to a broader ecosystem, but again, it's that horizontal platform and the integration points that allow you to scale and automate around aspects of risk remediation. It's the only way you're going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, every silo that you create chips away at your risk management strategy and oversight.
Yeah.
So, you got to think in that ecosystem approach.
Yep, exactly right. All right, Ben, I also brought this story in for you. Security leaders chart new post-CISO career paths. Interesting results here on where do once you're a CISO, kind of where do you go? We've had these conversations before. We've talked about different career paths and different roles in the organization, how to get into the CISO role. This one goes, well, once you've been a CISO, where do you go next, right? And there's some interesting data in here. Only 9%, by the way, said they wanted to retire, which I thought was interesting because I'm like, only 9%. I don't know that I'd want to run that job that long, but
it's kind of the end goal for everybody, I think, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah, I think so, but I guess we just have a lot of young CISOs out there, Ben, that aren't ready to retire yet.
Yeah. It must have been a radio button and not check boxes. That's what I'm thinking the survey was, right? Because I would have chose multiple. Retire.
Yeah. Right. Well, it is multiple. This was a multi-select because this is more than 100%. Because it said 47 said they want to become board members, 44% they wanted to stay in the role, 18% wanted to go entrepreneur consultant side, 16% chief risk officers. They're listening to us. If you don't own risk, then you report to risk. So elevation up to the chief risk officer. 12% CIO. So you fell into that mix, Jason. 8% want to go into private equity, which I thought was interesting, really interesting. I'd love to go into venture capitalism, by the way, and invest in companies, right? That'd be awesome. 3%
just on
CEOs.
that note, I want to say 8% are going to be disappointed.
3% wanted to move into a CEO role, and then 2% wanted to create a firm, new tools at a security firm. Which some came from the technical side, but not as of late. So only 2% going back and doing tools. I thought was actually kind of a low number, knowing how many came from the technology side. But
yeah, I think you gotta throw that into the entrepreneurs, right? Like I think it's an interesting mix, right? 20% of people want to go off and create a company. Like that's right. They don't know what that means yet, but that's ultimately what they want to do.
Yeah. I'll be honest, until now, I've never thought of a full-time board member role.
Oh, I don't know that they're full-time as much as, it's the combination of that retired, not having to, you can quit your day job, but still.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they should have chose retire as part of it too to bump that number up there.
Yeah, they really should have.
Right? Because
they're just sitting on like 10 different boards.
That's exactly right. Like they're not a full-time CISO anymore, Jason, right? What they are is they are the security expertise on various boards, which is kind of part of their retirement plan.
Yeah.
They're still working, but they're not doing it full-time. They're doing it part-time at a few different boards, and keeps them engaged during retirement if you're not ready to just fully golf all day long.
Yeah.
I didn't see any chief operating officer.
No.
Aspirations, peeps. COO, add that to the list.
There you go.
No, good article.
Ink's been putting out some really good articles around communication and leadership lately, and I've started pulling more of their articles in. This one, I was actually on my phone flipping through the news the other day because I try to catch up on the news every evening, and this one popped up. I'm like, that's a great little article. 5 interview questions that screen for success in hybrid workplaces. Because look, that's the world we're in, right? We're in some form of hybrid. You could be full remote, but I thought this was really interesting to really gauge, like, how do you know that somebody's going to succeed in a true hybrid model? And these bring some questions to bear that you can ask during the interview process to gauge, is this person going to work?
Yeah, I mean, number 3 is key. What's your ideal schedule in a hybrid role?
Yeah.
That sets expectations right away. So you know how often they want to be in, how often they want to be remote.
And it's just even having the conversation.
You gotta make sure that
Go ahead, Jason. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, you have to make sure that the organization expectation and the worker expectation are close.
Yeah.
When you're hiring someone new.
Yeah, I mean, it's for any role, right? I mean, you have to make sure that the gears mesh. And I think, the first part of that first conversation is just, what's your expectations? Have you ever worked remotely before, right? And did you work remotely before COVID, right? What was that like, right? Like, are you really a remote worker? Do you you can't, I don't think you can just assume because somebody, has worked remotely for the last 2.5 years that they really understand what that means, how that really functions in an optimal environment. There's a lot of differences there. So some people got thrown into it. They don't like it. They don't want it. And so just because you have a remote role doesn't mean that there's a great fit. And so I think, yes, are you hiring a person that could do the job, but are you hiring a person that ultimately wants to do the job that you have? That's really, really important to suss out.
And the crazy part, Ben, is I've actually seen the opposite of that. Folks who were thrown into remote work, right? Now they don't want to let go and even do any level of hybrid. I am not coming in. I've heard people say, I refuse to ever come back in again.
I've heard of people quitting. Yeah, I've heard of people quitting because they got told they had to come in. Apple's experiencing that issue, right? Like where there was a big backlash for wanting people come back in. And I've seen it too in corporations where the corporation has a general perspective on what work will look like, but the manager has a different perspective, right? And so that could be fully remote for the manager, or that could be, hey, I want all my people to come back in, and it doesn't match with what the new corporate culture is. So I think people have to get a hold on this. And I think I've said it a couple times before. I mean, don't be caught being the JCPenney or Sears in an Amazon world. Like things have changed. Like you need to get on board with how they've changed and make sure you're competitive.
It's not Sears anymore. It's Kmart.
Sorry. Yes. Kmart.
But your point is very valid for number 4. Like if based on your teamwork and collaboration style, how will hybrid work out for you? I mean, these are all very valid questions. And you guys touch on a lot of key points here because you have to make sure that the job fits the person and the person fits the job. It is now alignment in both directions. It probably always has been, but I think it's even more important now because of the expectations of remote and or hybrid. How does that factor into the whole hiring process to look for the right success? Because the worst mistake you can make is hire the right person for the wrong job or the wrong person for the right job, and then 6 months later you're back in the hiring process. That's not going to benefit anybody.
And I think one of the big changes that we've all talked about, we have access to more employees, right? In a remote workforce or a hybrid workforce, we have this potential to access a different pool that we had. But what you have to realize, and why it's really important to make sure the fit works both ways, is people have a choice too, right? That also is a dual-edged, multifaceted street, right? So just because you happen to be in a market where you had a people that were kind of locked into the few jobs that were there, they now have access anywhere. So you no longer have that locked up market of people. You no longer have that locked up of low salary market. Like, you've got to think in a holistic environment. Those people now have access to the global workforce. So be prepared for it. Make sure you're addressing that. Make sure you're planning that for salaries, raises, merit increases, how you're keeping people engaged, and how you're hiring.
Yeah, I think it's happening and has been. It's the reshuffle we're seeing, right? Not the resignation, it's the reshuffle. They're going off and finding the better fit.
Yeah.
Is what's ultimately
only
9%
right? Are retiring. Let's remember that. Only 9%. Yeah. That's what the study said.
Right. Right. Exactly. Right. But I mean, don't get me wrong. So many organizations that I talk to are still trying to figure out what the right balance is. Nobody has the magic wand to know, and it's culture by culture, organization by organization, and so many CEOs are going, what is the right mix here? How do we do this? So everybody's.
And I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure out how you create that balance, because there are roles that have to be in the office, right? The guy packing boxes in your warehouse, like, you can't do that from the house efficiently, right? But then what does that mean of who you need to support him in the office? Who can be remote, right? How do you create the right balance so it's fair for everybody? It's an open question that I think we'll be struggling with for a while. But again, the people who figure it out, they will accelerate out of everything, and they will come out on top from a competitive side.
Yeah, we're not done with this challenge. We're no stretch in the imagination. So, I mean, companies are going to continue to figure out. Look, it took us 2 years to get this point. I don't expect us to get out of it overnight. It's going to take us a couple of years to figure this out and shift our hiring practices, our training practices, our retention practices. All these things are going to continue to shift and morph over the next couple of years until an organization kind of has it in their rhythm, right? I think it's going to vary by company to company, to your point, Jason, but it's going to take time to figure out still.
Yep, 100%.
Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.